Now it's time to discuss the United Nations. No conspiracy theory can work without it, and Fairley is far from alone in seeing it as part of an end-time scenario. For someone like me who is a preterist, the UN is a misguided fantasy at worst, but not a tool of any future Antichrist figure. Fairley's first mistake relates to claiming Franklin Roosevelt was a member of the Illuminati. As we've noted, that organization was defunct centuries before. But Fairley is correct that Roosevelt coined the name United Nations, on the date Fairley notes. Other facts used by Fairley about UN history seem to come from the UN's own website, and seem to be correct. So let's just check a few other claims. Well, not so sure of this. The League of Nations Charter has just 26 articles and was extremely short. The UN Charter has 111 articles and is long enough to choke a horse. I don't doubt there will be some similarities, of course, but it seems to me that a document over 4 times longer is going to be substantially different as well. So much so that the sort of comparison Fairley is making needs some specific backup. As noted earlier, the bit about the Rothschilds is false. As for Balfour heavily influencing the original charter, we'd like to know how, since histories of the League, like F.S. Northedge's The League of Nations, don't give Balfour any sort of role in the drafting process. At the time of the drafting of the League's Covenant, 1919, Balfour was Foreign Secretary, not Prime Minister. Balfour served as Prime Minister much earlier from 1902 to 1905. It's true that Balfour was part of the SPR. Balfour was also indeed a member of the Synthetic Society. Formally, the object of the group was to consider existing agnostic tendencies and contribute towards a working philosophy of religious belief, without looking for dogmas, doctrines, or certainties. That means there could not have been an effort to establish a world religion. Myers did state that the purpose of SPR was to create the said preamble. He did this as part of his presidential address in 1900, saying it would do this by providing proof against materialism. Balfour was indeed known for having an odd personality, although Balfourian manner is the more usual way it's expressed. Fairley's take on it comes from the classic description by a contemporary, Harold Begbie, in Mirrors of Downing Street, which refers to a convinced superiority that insists on keeping the vulgar world at arm's length, along with aloofness and self-satisfaction. But there's no need to involve Satan, as Fairley does. And by the way, Beelzebub means Lord of the Flies, not Lord of Restless Motion. Hiss did chair the conference that composed the charter, but that he was largely responsible for writing it is rather outlandish. There were 4 commissions divided into numerous committees, charged with the contents. I can't find any evidence that Johnson was part of this process, and much less that he took part in writing the charter. The history of Hiss is generally correct. The history of Johnson is correct, except that turning that group into a secret Masonic society is nothing but paranoia. I'm glad Fairley said, "it's said," rather than saying it's true, because it isn't. It doesn't help to start that there have actually been 3 constitutions of the USSR, but you can compare all of them if you're really interested in finding out how identical they are. I'll skip some of the political aspects of what Fairley offers since it isn't my area of expertise, and close with some quote checks. Although this is popularly attributed to Youthant, I can't find anyone who gives a source for it. I've traced a possible first source back to 1971 in an issue of Saturday Review, but it isn't readily available to me. I can't find any original source for this quote. And this one too is otherwise unverifiable. I'll rate this one a quarter tank. I should start this one on the spiritual UN by saying I disagree with Fairley on the UN. Not because I support it, but rather because I think of it as a mostly ineffectual, incompetent, and useless product of misplaced fantasies. I could never think of it as a source for any New World Order, because I don't think it could put the numbers 1 through 10 in order correctly. That said, how about some fact checks? The circle is the globe itself, and the crescent is the wreath, which is olive leaves, not laurel. As far as seeing sun and moon, that's too imaginative. Circles are too often used as common shapes to make that claim, and so are semicircles or crescents. Since Fairley gets wrong that the leaves are laurel, this renders as moot a lot else he says on the logo. What they actually are is non-profit groups who partner with the UN in various ways. They have no overseeing powers to speak of except within their own organizations. There are also a lot of them, including the Temple of Understanding, but Fairley gets some facts wrong about that group. The founder was not Jean Houston, as Fairley says, but Juliet Hollister. The quote from her alleged book, Trojan Horse, has some problems in that there is no book by that title listed in the online catalog of the Library of Congress, by either Jean Houston or Juliet Hollister. The quote itself appears in no credible source. The temple does not clearly claim Roosevelt as a member, but does cite her support. Both Roosevelt and Thant are described as founding friends. As far as chapters all over the world, well, it has two, India and Australia. Well, that's not correct. The address of the temple is 211 East 43rd Street, Suite 1600, New York, while the address of the cathedral is 1047 Amsterdam Avenue. This is all pretty much true. You can even still read a news story about that crucified woman figure. Fairley should be more specific. What he appears to have in mind is this report, which I found on various conspiracy websites. Unfortunately, this alleged role for Moore is not mentioned in any work on the history of the People's Temple, although Moore was dean of the Episcopal Cathedral in Indianapolis from 1957 to 1964. Reiterman says Jones bought his first property in 1956. None of the books mentions Armstrong. Chidester is the only one who mentions Davis as someone who spoke to the Senate after the Jonestown Massacre, saying the path of cults leads to Jonestown. Not that I can find. The closest I can find is that Lovelock described oxygen as a potential cancer-causing agent. The book Revenge of Gaia refers to the Earth, not Gaia, as subject to an illness, but relates it to greenhouse gases. This is true. It's reported in some reliable sources. Actually, Barry died in 2009. He won the Temple of Understanding's Juliet Hollister Award, and is listed as a founding friend as well. Fairley doesn't give any quotes from Barry, but given his associations, what Fairley offers is probably not an unreasonable summary. L'Engle is not listed among the founding friends of the Temple of Understanding. There's some evidence from a 1993 edition of American Arts Quarterly that she spoke at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine, but I can't find anything pro or con about what she taught. I'll give this one a half tank.